All right, so today we are diving deep into Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.
One of the greats.
We're going to be focusing on chapters 32 through 37.
Ooh, getting juicy.
Yeah, things start to heat up, and, we have a surprise proposal.
Yes.
We have a very shocking letter.
Lots of drama.
And we see Elizabeth Bennet, our main character, really start to go on a journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely pivotal chapters in this book.
So before we get into it, I guess it would be good to kind of set the stage for listeners who may not be as familiar with the story.
Okay, yeah.
So we have Elizabeth Bennet, who is our protagonist.
Our heroine.
Yes, and she is, sharp-witted.
Very much so.
And independent.
Headstrong.
And then we have Mr. Darcy.
Ah, Mr. Darcy.
Who initially comes across as very arrogant and aloof.
Yes.
And their relationship is very
It
complicated.
really is.
So I guess to start off, maybe you could talk a little bit about how Austen really sets up this dynamic between Elizabeth and Darcy.
Yeah, so I think Austen does a really masterful job of weaving this theme of Pride and Prejudice throughout the novel, and particularly in these chapters.
Yeah.
And it's really evident in the interactions between Elizabeth and Darcy.
Right.
So, Darcy's pride is very clear from the beginning.
Mm.
He kind of looks down on Elizabeth's family because of their social standing.
And her lack of connections.
Exactly. And so that really fuels Elizabeth's prejudice against him.
Right.
And then on the other hand, Elizabeth is quick to judge.
Yes.
Especially based on, first impressions.
And of course, Whittam's lies don't help.
Oh, absolutely. Wickham is a master manipulator.
Oh, he's a scoundrel.
Totally. And his lies really create this whole web of misunderstanding that impacts, pretty much all the characters.
Right.
But especially Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, he really paints this picture of Darcy that is just completely false.
It's totally misleading.
So let's talk about that proposal, because it is just so
oh my goodness,
awkward and cringy.
I know, right? I mean, who proposes like that?
It's so bad.
He basically insults her family while telling her he's in love with her.
Yeah, and he's so proud and arrogant about it.
Exactly. It's like he thinks he's doing her a favor by even considering her.
What do you think Austen was going for here?
Well, I think she was really highlighting the clash between pride and genuine emotion.
Okay.
Because Darcy clearly has feelings for Elizabeth,
Yeah.
but his pride and his upbringing keep getting in the way.
So it's like this internal struggle for him.
Absolutely, and it creates this tension that makes the scene both cringeworthy and also kind of compelling.
Yeah, you can't help but feel a little bit sorry for him.
I know, right? Like he's trying so hard, but he's going about it all wrong.
It's no wonder Elizabeth is furious.
Oh, she has every right to be.
And this really sets the stage for that pivotal letter.
Oh, yes. The letter that changes everything.
So talk to us about the letter.
Well, first of all, it's a masterstroke of dramatic irony.
Okay.
Because we, as readers, know the truth about Wickham.
Right.
But Elizabeth is still completely in the dark.
So we're just waiting for her to find out.
Exactly. And when she finally reads the letter, it's like a bomb has been dropped.
And she doesn't believe it at first.
Well, of course not. It goes against everything she thought she knew about both Darcy and Wickham.
So it really forces her to confront her own prejudices.
Yes, and it's the catalyst for her journey of self-discovery.
It's interesting to me how Austen uses the letter not only to reveal Wickham's true nature, but also to show us a more vulnerable side of Darcy.
That's a really good point.
I mean, he admits his faults.
He does.
He talks about his struggles with pride.
Which is huge for him.
Right, and he confesses his genuine affection for Elizabeth.
It definitely makes him a more sympathetic figure.
Yeah, you start to see him in a new light.
Absolutely, and it makes you question whether you've misjudged him all along.
Like Elizabeth has.
Exactly.
One thing that always strikes me about Pride and Prejudice is how Austen portrays the impact of social class.
Oh yeah, it's not just a backdrop, it's a driving force in the story.
Absolutely. So much of what happens is influenced by social expectations and the pressure to marry well.
Right. And you see that most clearly with Charlotte Lupus's decision to marry Mr. Collins.
Oh, Mr. Collins.
I know he's awful, but for Charlotte, it was a pragmatic choice.
Yeah, she needed financial security.
And that was really the only option for a woman in her position.
It's a stark contrast to Elizabeth, who refuses to compromise her happiness.
She wants to marry for love, not for convenience.
Exactly.
But even Elizabeth isn't immune to the pressures of society.
True. She is very aware of her family's lower social standing.
And how it's perceived by someone like Darcy.
Right.
So Austen shows us how even the most independent spirits can be influenced by the expectations of their time.
And then there's Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Oh my goodness. She is a piece of work.
She's like the embodiment of the widget upper class.
Totally. She's always trying to control everything and everyone around her.
She's so obsessed with social status and propriety.
It's ridiculous.
Austen is so good at satirizing the aristocracy.
She really is.
Okay, so we've got pride, prejudice, deception, social expectations.
It's a lot to unpack.
Austen tackles some pretty weighty themes.
She does, but she does it with such wit and intelligence.
It's what makes her writing so brilliant.
And her mastery of language is just incredible.
It's more than just clever dialogue. It's how she uses language to shape the reader's experience.
Right.
Like when we're reading Elizabeth's thoughts as she's processing Darcy's letter.
Yes, we're right there with her.
It's like we're feeling her confusion and her dawning realization.
It's so powerful.
And that's what makes Elizabeth such a relatable character.
Even with all her flaws.
So how does Austen do that? Is there like a literary term for this?
Yes, it's called free indirect discourse.
Free indirect discourse.
It's basically a way for the author to slip into a character's thoughts and feelings without using those traditional tags like she thought or he felt.
Oh, okay, I get it.
It creates this sense of intimacy with the character.
Like we're in their head.
Exactly, and it's one of Austen's most powerful techniques.
This is already so insightful.
We're just getting started.
I know, I'm loving this.
Me too.
But before we move on, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about Elizabeth's inner world, but what about Darcy? How does his language reflect his character?
That's a great question. So Darcy's language is often very formal,
Yeah?
even stilted, which kind of reinforces that initial impression of him as aloof and reserved.
Right.
But if you look closely, you can see these glimpses of his true feelings breaking through,
Oh, really?
particularly when he's with Elizabeth.
Okay.
It's subtle, but it's there.
That makes me think about his letter again.
Hmm.
It's so formal and detailed, almost like a legal document.
It is.
But there's also this raw honesty, this vulnerability that we haven't seen from him before.
Right, and that contrast is really key to understanding Darcy's complexity.
Okay?
He's struggling to reconcile his upbringing and his social position with his genuine feelings for Elizabeth.
So it's this internal conflict that makes him so interesting.
Exactly.
Wow, I feel like I'm seeing Pride and Prejudice in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of revisiting classic literature.
You always discover something new.
Absolutely.
Well, I am eager to keep exploring these chapters and see what other insights we can uncover.
Me too. This is fascinating.
Okay, let's take a short break and we'll be right back with more from our deep dive into Pride and Prejudice.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
So we were talking about free indirect discourse before the break.
Oh, yeah. Such a cool technique.
I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it.
Well, it's basically like this Austen can slip into a character's thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
But without using those tags that you normally see.
Like she thought.
Exactly.
So it's more subtle.
Way more subtle.
But also more powerful.
Totally, because it's like we're right there with the character experiencing their emotions firsthand.
So it's like we're in Elizabeth's head when she's reading Darcy's letter.
Exactly. You feel her confusion, her anger, and then that gradual shift in understanding.
It's so well done.
Austen was a master of this technique.
Do you have a specific example from these chapters where she uses it really well?
Sure. So one that comes to mind is it's after Darcy reveals Wickham's true nature in the letter.
Okay.
And Elizabeth is trying to reconcile that with everything she thought she knew.
Right.
And Austen describes her mind as being in this like tumult, a hurricane.
Wow, yeah.
It just perfectly captures that feeling of having your world turned upside down.
That's such a good example.
You really feel the chaos of her thoughts.
And it's so relatable, right? I mean, I think we've all had moments where we realize we've misjudged someone or clung to a belief that turned out to be totally false.
That's the genius of Austen. She captures those very human experiences in such a powerful way.
And through Elizabeth's struggles, we as readers can kind of examine our own biases and assumptions.
Absolutely, she makes us question our own perceptions.
It's incredible how she does that without being preachy or judgmental.
She's so subtle and nuanced.
And it's not just the free indirect discourse that makes her writing so effective.
Right, she's got a whole arsenal of literary tools at her disposal.
Like her use of irony.
Oh, the irony is so delicious.
It adds humor, but it also makes us think more critically about the characters and their actions.
Exactly.
Can you give us an example of how she uses irony in these chapters?
Oh, there are so many, but one that stands out is when Elizabeth describes Darcy's confession of love as being bestowed most unwillingly.
Oh, right.
Which is hilarious because we know he's head over heels for her.
Yeah, it's like he's doing her this huge favor by proposing.
It's so absurd.
And it really highlights that wall of pride and prejudice that exists between them.
Totally. They're both so blinded by their own preconceptions that they miss what's right in front of them.
And Austen uses irony to point that out to the reader.
Exactly. It's her way of saying, like, hey, look at this absurdity. Are you seeing this?
It makes the reading experience so much more enjoyable.
Austen can be insightful and thought-provoking while also being incredibly entertaining.
It's a rare gift.
It truly is.
So one of the things that really stands out in these chapters is the whole issue of social mobility or rather the lack of it.
Oh yeah, it's a huge theme in the novel.
Elizabeth's rejection of Darcy's proposal is partly due to her awareness of their social differences
Right, she's very conscious of her family's lower social standing.
and how it might be perceived by someone like Darcy.
Exactly.
But it's also a commentary on the rigidity of the class system in Austen's time.
Absolutely, there's this sense that people are trapped within their social spheres with little opportunity for movement.
Which makes Charlotte Lucas's decision to marry Mr. Collins even more poignant.
It was a purely pragmatic choice.
She had to prioritize financial security over love or personal fulfillment.
Which was the reality for many women back then.
It's sad, but it's true.
But I think Austen presents Charlotte's decision with a sense of empathy.
Yeah,
She's not judging her, she's acknowledging the difficult circumstances that led her to that point.
that's like she's saying this is the reality of the world we live in.
Exactly.
And within that reality, individuals still have to make choices based on their own unique circumstances.
And those choices often reveal a lot about human nature.
So it's not just about social constraints, it's about individual agency.
Right. Even within a seemingly rigid system, people still have the power to make their own decision.
And Elizabeth is a great example of that.
She defies societal expectations and chooses to follow her own path.
Speaking of Elizabeth, you mentioned earlier that Austen uses a lot of nature imagery when describing her feelings.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things about her writing.
Can you give us an example?
Well, for instance, when Elizabeth is processing her feelings for Darcy after the letter,
Okay.
Austen describes her thoughts as wandering in a wilderness of doubt.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Isn't it? The imagery of a wilderness, vast and uncertain, perfectly captures Elizabeth's emotional state.
It's so evocative.
It really adds another layer of depth to her character and her journey.
And it's not just the nature imagery that's significant.
Right.
Austen also uses settings in really interesting ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the contrast between Rosings Park and Longbourn.
Such different atmospheres.
Rosings feels so oppressive.
It represents that stifling world of social hierarchy and rigid expectations.
And it's no coincidence that Elizabeth feels most uncomfortable there.
Exactly. She's a free spirit trapped in a gilded cage.
Whereas Longbourn, while not luxurious, represents warmth and familiarity.
It's home.
Even if it's a bit chaotic at times.
It's where Elizabeth feels most herself.
Surrounded by her family and her own thoughts.
It's a sanctuary from the pressures of society.
It's fascinating how Austen uses these settings to subtly reinforce the themes of social class and individual freedom.
She's so clever.
Even the physical spaces reflect the characters' struggles and aspirations.
It all comes together so beautifully.
This is amazing. I feel like I'm seeing Pride and Prejudice with new eyes.
I'm glad to hear that.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, is there anything else that stands out to you about these chapters? Anything you think our listeners should pay particular attention to?
I think it's important to note how Austen uses these chapters to kind of foreshadow what's to come.
Okay.
Elizabeth's journey is far from over.
Of course.
And the challenges she faces here will have lasting consequences.
Right.
The seeds of change have been planted, but there's still a lot of growth and transformation ahead.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see how it all unfolds.
Me neither. This is just the beginning.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Pride and Prejudice.
Really getting into the good stuff now.
Yeah, and we've been talking about Austen's incredible use of language, the impact of social class, and of course, Elizabeth's journey of self-discovery.
It's amazing how much there is to uncover in these chapters.
But I feel like there's still more to discuss.
Oh, absolutely. There's always more.
One thing that I've been thinking about is how Austen uses these chapters to kind of critique the societal norms of her time.
Yeah, it's not just a love story.
No, it goes much deeper than that.
She's really challenging the whole system.
Can you give us an example?
Well, look at Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Oh boy.
She is the epitome of the landed gentry wielding her social status like a weapon.
She's so obsessed with power and control.
Totally. And her attempts to dictate Elizabeth's choices.
Oh yeah, she tries to control everything.
It just highlights the absurdity of a system that values birthright over genuine affection or merit.
So it's like a commentary on the whole aristocracy.
Exactly. Austen is exposing the hypocrisy and the shallowness that often come with that kind of social power.
And then you have Elizabeth, who stands up to Lady Catherine.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth is not having any of it.
It's such a great moment.
It shows her independent spirit and her refusal to be bound by these arbitrary rules.
It's a reminder that true worth comes from character, not from your social standing.
Exactly. And that's something that Darcy eventually comes to realize.
Yeah, he undergoes quite a transformation.
He shuts that arrogance and learns to value Elizabeth for who she truly is.
Not for her family's connections or their lack thereof.
Right. He sees her intelligence, her wit, her strong moral compass.
It's a beautiful thing.
And it's a message that still resonates today.
Absolutely. We're still grappling with issues of class and privilege and social mobility.
It's a timeless theme.
Speaking of social mobility, these chapters also highlight the very limited options available to women in Austen's time.
Oh, yeah. It's heartbreaking, really.
I mean, Charlotte Lucas marrying Mr. Collins.
Such a pragmatic choice.
But she had to prioritize financial security.
There wasn't much choice for women back then.
It makes you appreciate how far we've come.
But also how much work there's still to do.
But even within those constraints, Austen shows that women still had agency.
They made choices based on their own circumstance.
Like Elizabeth.
She's a force to be reckoned with.
She chooses to defy societal norms.
And to forge her own path.
It's inspiring.
It really is.
It reminds us that we have the power to choose our own destiny.
Even in the face of adversity.
Well, this deep dive has been truly enlightening.
It's amazing how much depth there is to this novel.
I feel like I'm seeing Pride and Prejudice with fresh eyes.
That's the beauty of revisiting classic literature.
There's always something new to discover.
So as we wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with?
Any final thoughts about Pride and Prejudice?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this is more than just a charming love story.
It's a social commentary.
It's a celebration of individual agency.
And it's a timeless exploration of the human heart.
It's a story that continues to resonate with readers centuries later.
Because it speaks to those universal truths about love and loss and finding your place in the world.
Beautifully said.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Pride and Prejudice.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another literary adventure.
Until next time.